52, not 50, not 100, 52. The number of weeks in a year, the number of Mondays you will wake up to between now and this same day next year, the number of times the sun will complete a full circuit of the week and hand you a fresh page whether you feel ready for it or not. 52 is the number of times you will begin again over the next 12 months. And that is exactly why there are 52 truths in this teaching spoken by Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago, and every single one of them is aimed at the same target: the quiet, persistent, deeply mistaken story you have been telling yourself about who you are. Think about that number for a moment, because it is not decoration. It is a doorway. If you took one of these truths, just one, and carried it with you for a week, letting it work its way down from your head into your chest, letting it surface in the shower and in traffic and in the long silence before sleep, you would arrive at this same day next year as a person who had spent an entire year being spoken to by God about your identity. Not a weekend retreat. Not a burst of inspiration that fades by Wednesday. A year, 52 weeks of steady, patient, undoing work on the deepest lies you carry, because you do carry them. Almost everyone does. And they are rarely dramatic. They are not usually the loud, obvious falsehoods that you would recognize and reject if someone said them out loud to your face. They are quieter than that and far more convincing. They sound like, "I am too much for people." They sound like, "I am not enough for this." They sound like, if they knew what I actually think about at 3 in the morning, they would leave. They sound like, "I am the sum of my worst week." They sound like, "God tolerates me the way a patient person tolerates a difficult relative, technically welcome, never really wanted." These are not beliefs you chose. Nobody sits down one afternoon and decides to think poorly of themselves. They are beliefs you absorbed. From a father who never quite said the thing you were waiting to hear, from a season of failure that seemed to confirm what you already suspected, from a relationship that ended in a way that made you the problem, from 1,000 small moments that accumulated into a settled conviction about your own value. And once such a conviction is settled, it stops feeling like a belief at all. It starts to feel like a fact. It starts to feel like realism. It starts to feel like simply seeing yourself clearly. That is the thing that must be rewired, not your circumstances, not your discipline, not your habits, though those may well change as a consequence. The wiring itself, the underlying assumption about what kind of creature you are and what you are worth and whether you are wanted. And here is what makes this study different from every other attempt you may have made at thinking better of yourself. We are not going to try to talk you into a higher opinion of your own qualities. That approach fails, and it fails for a reason. You cannot build a stable identity on your own performance because your performance fluctuates. You have good weeks and bad weeks. You are patient on Tuesday and impossible on Thursday. If your sense of self rises and falls with your behavior, then you have not solved the problem. You have simply attached your worth to a moving object and agreed to be dragged along behind it. What we are going to do instead is something far older and far more solid. We are going to listen one at a time to 52 things that Jesus actually said about human beings, about people like you, spoken to people like you, in real rooms and on real roads and beside real wells and from an actual cross. And we are going to let those statements do the work, because when the one who made you tells you what you are, that is not encouragement. That is information. It is not a compliment. It is a description. And a description from the maker of a thing carries an authority that no amount of self-talk can match. Some of these 52 truths will comfort you immediately. Others will unsettle you first and comfort you later, because some of the lies we carry are ones we have grown fond of, and losing them feels at first like a loss. A few will require you to set down something you have been holding for years. But all 52 point in the same direction, and by the end of this teaching, you will have heard from the mouth of Jesus himself a complete portrait of who you actually are. Not who you fear you are, not who you perform being, not who your worst memory says you are. We are going to take our time. There will be no rush here, and no bullet-pointed summary at the end for you to skim. We will sit with each saying, look at where it was spoken and to whom. Examine the original words where the original words matter, and then bring it home to the actual room you are sitting in right now. This is a slow walk, deliberately. The things that go deepest go slowest. So wherever you are, whatever hour it is where you sit, whatever kind of week this has been, whatever you were doing before you pressed play, you are welcome here exactly as you are. You do not have to arrive composed. You do not have to have your theology sorted, or your life in order, or your feelings under control. The people Jesus spoke these 52 things to were not composed either. They were fishermen with rough hands and short tempers, women who had been publicly shamed, tax collectors nobody would eat with, sick people who had run out of money and options, and disciples who kept misunderstanding him right up until the end. He said these things to them. He is saying them to you. Let us begin. Before we open the first of the 52, I want to ask you for one small thing. And it is genuinely one thing, not a list. If this teaching is going to be worth anything to you, would you leave a like on this video? That is all. It is free, it takes a single tap, and I am not asking for it because of an algorithm or a number on a screen. I am asking because of something simpler and more human than that. Right now, somewhere in the world, there is a person awake at an hour they should not be awake, believing something untrue and cruel about themselves, and they are looking for something, anything, that might speak to it. Whether these words find that person depends almost entirely on whether people like you tap that button. Your one tap is what carries this teaching across the distance to a stranger you will never meet and never hear about. It is a quiet act of kindness towards someone whose name you will never learn. So if you would, tap the like button, the thumbs up just below this video. And that is the whole ask. Nothing else. And then, if you are willing, do one more thing for yourself. In the comments, leave a single word, just one, for what you are carrying into this teaching. Not an explanation, not a paragraph, one word for the weight you are hoping to set down over these next hours. Fear, grief, shame, exhaustion, doubt, whatever the honest word is. There is something clarifying about naming a thing in one word, and something quietly powerful about seeing it sitting there in a list alongside hundreds of other people's one word, all of them carrying something, none of them alone in it. Now, 52 truths. Let us take the first one. Part 1. The truths that tell you who you already are. Before Jesus ever corrected anyone, he told them what they were. That order matters enormously, and almost everyone gets it backwards. We assume that God's first word to us is a word of critique, that he begins with what is wrong and works toward acceptance if we cooperate. But watch the actual sequence in the Gospels. He calls before he corrects. He names before he trains. He declares an identity and then, only afterward, invites a life that matches it. These first 9 truths are the foundation, and they all belong to that opening move. They are not things you become by trying. They are things that are said over you at the start, before you have contributed anything at all, and everything else in this teaching rests on them. Truth 1. Follow me. Matthew 4:19. And he saith unto them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. The first recorded words Jesus ever spoke to the men who would become his closest companions were not a doctrinal statement, not an evaluation, and not a set of entry requirements. They were an invitation with a promise attached. Come with me, and I will make something of you. Consider who was standing there. Simon and Andrew were in the water, casting a net, which tells you something about their economic standing, because the men who could afford boats fished from boats, and the men who could not waded in and threw by hand. These were working men in the middle of an ordinary shift on an ordinary morning. They had no rabbinic training. In the world they lived in, that was not a small detail. A Jewish boy of that era who showed exceptional promise would continue his studies and eventually seek out a rabbi who would examine him and decide whether he was worth investing in. The boys who were not exceptional went home and learned the family trade. Simon and Andrew were fishing. That fact alone announced, publicly and permanently, that they had already been weighed by the religious system of their day and found ordinary. And Jesus walked past the men the system had approved and called the men it had passed over. Look closely at the grammar of the promise, because the whole of your identity is buried in it. I will make you. Not, become this, and then I will accept you. Not, demonstrate that you have the aptitude, and I will consider you. The making is his work, not theirs. All that is asked of them is the following. He assumes full responsibility for the transformation and asks them only for proximity. This is the first truth, and it undoes one of the most persistent lies human beings carry. The belief that we must arrive at some threshold of competence, cleanness, or credibility before God has any real interest in us. That belief feels like humility. It is not. It is a subtle form of self-reliance, because it assumes that our qualification is our own project, that we are the ones who must produce a version of ourselves fit for divine attention. Jesus dismantles that at the water's edge. He does not scout for talent. He calls, and the calling is what confers the standing. Notice, too, that he called them in the middle of their work, not in a temple, not on a holy day, not in a moment of spiritual readiness. They were tired, wet, and thinking about the day's catch. There is a lie that says God's call comes to people during their spiritual high points, and that the mundane texture of your actual life, the commute, the laundry, the third meeting of the day, the same tasks you did yesterday, is somehow the place where you are farthest from him. The evidence says otherwise. He came to the shoreline. He came to the shift. So here is the first correction to your self-portrait. You are not someone waiting to be qualified. You are someone who has already been called, and the calling itself is the qualification. If you have been quietly assuming that God is holding off on you until you become more usable, understand what actually happened on that shore. The making was promised before a single thing was proven. He did not call them because they were fishers of men. He called them so that they would become it. You are someone worth calling. That was settled before you did anything at all. Truth 2, ye are the salt of the earth. Matthew 5:13, ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost his savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out, and to be trodden under foot of men. Sit with the tense of that opening phrase, because it is the whole point, and it is almost always missed. He does not say, you should try to be salt. He does not say, if you work at this diligently, you may one day become salt. He says, ye are, present tense, already true, stated as a fact about the people sitting in front of him on that hillside, a crowd that included, by every indication, the poor, the sick, the anxious, the curious, and the unimpressive. To understand the weight of what he is saying, you have to understand what salt meant in the first century, because it was not what it means to you. In your kitchen, salt is a small convenience, a shaker on the table, an afterthought, something you add if the food is bland. In the ancient world, salt was infrastructure. It was one of the most valuable commodities in the Roman economy. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in it, which is where the word salary comes from. It was the only reliable method of preserving meat and fish in a world with no refrigeration, which meant that salt was quite literally the difference between a community that could store food through the winter and one that could not. Salt was not a garnish. Salt was survival. So when Jesus says, "Ye are the salt of the earth," he is not offering a gentle compliment about being a nice influence on those around you. He is saying, you are the preserving agent in a world that is decaying. You are what holds back rot. Your presence in your family, your workplace, your street, your ordinary and unremarkable circle of relationships is not incidental to what God is doing in the world. It is the mechanism of it. And now hold that against the way you actually think about yourself. Most people, if they are honest, operate with a quiet sense of their own dispensability. You may believe you matter to a handful of people, but you probably suspect that if you were removed from the larger picture, the picture would carry on almost identically. Your workplace would fill the role. Your circle would close over the space. The world would not notice. That suspicion sits underneath a great deal of low-grade despair, and it is one of the reasons people find it so hard to take their own lives seriously. Not in the sense of self-importance, but in the sense of significance. If nothing turns on you, then nothing you do carries much weight. And if nothing you do carries much weight, then it hardly matters what you do. Jesus attacks that assumption directly. Salt is not optional. Remove the salt from a first-century household and food spoils. Remove it from the supply chain, and the town cannot survive a hard season. He is telling a crowd of nobodies that their presence has a preserving function in the world, and that the world is measurably different because they are in it. Note carefully what he does not say. He does not say that some of you, the impressive ones, are the salt of the earth. He does not distinguish between the gifted and the ordinary in the crowd. The statement is made over everyone listening, which means the preserving effect he describes is not a function of platform or personality or reach. It is a function of presence. It is what happens when a person shaped by God is simply present in a place, being honest where honesty is inconvenient, being kind where kindness is not required, refusing to participate in the small corruptions that everybody else has agreed to overlook. The warning that follows is real, but notice its shape. The danger is not that you fail to become salt. It is that salt loses its savor, that what you already are becomes ineffective through neglect. The concern is not your qualification, it is your distinctiveness. Salt that has become indistinguishable from the dirt around it accomplishes nothing, not because it was never salt, but because it stopped being different. So write this into your self-understanding. Your ordinary life is doing something. The unremarkable faithfulness you have shown for years in the places no one is watching has been holding back a decay you will probably never see and never be thanked for. You are not incidental. You are not a spare part. You are the preserving agent, and you have been the whole time. Truth 3, ye are the light of the world. Matthew 5:14-16. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle, and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works, and glorify your Father which is in heaven. He says it twice in 2 sentences, in 2 different images, because he is saying something the crowd would have found almost impossible to accept about themselves. Understand what light meant to people who had no electricity. Darkness in the ancient world was total. When the sun went down, it went down completely, and a single oil lamp was the difference between a household that could function and one that had to stop. Light was not ambiance. Light was capability. It was the ability to see the step in front of you, to find the thing you dropped, to keep working, to keep moving. And he says, that is what you are. Then he adds an image that must have startled them, a city set on a hill. Travelers in that region walked at night, and the sight of a hilltop town with its lamps burning was visible for miles across the dark valleys. It was a navigational fact. It told you where you were. It told you how far you had to go. You could not miss it, and you could not mistake it for anything else. Now notice what he does not command. He never says, become light. He says you are light, and then his only instruction is to stop obscuring it. Do not put the lamp under a bushel being a common household container, an ordinary clay vessel for measuring grain. He is not warning against dramatic rebellion. He is warning against the small, domestic, entirely understandable instinct to cover what you are with something ordinary. That instinct has a name, and you know it well. It is the fear of taking up space. It is the reflex that makes you downplay what God has done in you, that makes you deflect encouragement, that makes you keep quiet about the one thing you actually know to be true because you are afraid of appearing presumptuous. Many people who would never call themselves proud have spent decades under a bushel, and they call it humility. It is not humility. Humility is an accurate assessment of yourself, and an accurate assessment of yourself now includes the sentence Jesus just spoke over you. And then the aim that they may see your good works and glorify your Father. The purpose of visible light is never the lamp. Nobody at a hilltop city compliments the lamps. They see the town. When you stop hiding, the attention does not terminate on you. It passes through you to the one who lit you. That is what makes this bearable. You are not being asked to make yourself impressive. You are being asked to stop dimming something that was never about you in the first place. So the correction to your self-portrait is this. You have been thinking of your visibility as a risk to be managed. Jesus thinks of it as a service to be rendered. Somewhere near you, there is a person walking in the dark who is navigating by a light they have not identified yet. It may be yours. Do not put it under a bushel. Truth 4. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Matthew 5:3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Of all the sentences Jesus ever spoke, this may be the one that most directly contradicts the way you evaluate yourself, and it is the first thing out of his mouth in the most famous sermon in human history. The Greek word behind poor here is tokos, and it is not the ordinary word for a person of modest means. That word is penes, and it describes someone who works hard and has little. Tokos describes someone who has nothing at all. A beggar, someone crouched down, someone entirely dependent on the mercy of others for the next meal. It is a word of total destitution, not of tight budgets, and Jesus attaches it to the Spirit. Blessed are those who are spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are those who have nothing to bring, nothing to trade, no reserves to draw on, no impressive interior life to present. Blessed are those who have come to the end of their own religious resources and know it. That is not what anyone expects, and it was not what that crowd expected either. Every religious system on earth, then and now, is structured on the assumption that the spiritually accomplished are the ones nearest to God, the disciplined, the consistent, the people whose prayer life is functioning, whose doubts are managed, whose emotions cooperate. Jesus opens his ministry by inverting the entire ranking. The kingdom, he says, belongs, present tense, already in full possession, to the ones with nothing. Now bring that to your own inner life. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from feeling spiritually empty and believing that this emptiness is a disqualification. You pray and it feels like talking into a wall. You read and nothing lands. You sit in a service surrounded by people who appear to be experiencing something you are not, and you conclude that whatever they have, you have lost or never had. And underneath that is a devastating assumption that your emptiness is evidence of God's distance. Jesus says the opposite. Your emptiness is the qualification, not a barrier to the kingdom, the address of it. Why? Because a kingdom is a place ruled by someone else. The only way to enter a kingdom is to stop being the one in charge, and nothing produces that surrender like genuinely running out. As long as you have reserves, you will draw on them. As long as you have a version of yourself that seems adequate, you will manage. It is only when the resources are gone that a person can receive rather than achieve. So if you are sitting there with nothing, no momentum, no feeling, no sense of God, nothing but the honest awareness that you are empty, hear this carefully. You are not on the outside of what Jesus is describing. You are precisely who he opened his mouth to address. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven, not will be. Is truth 5? The very hairs of your head are all numbered. Matthew 10:30, but the very hairs of your head are all numbered. It is one of the strangest sentences in the Gospels, and it is easy to read past it as a poetic flourish. It is not a flourish. It is an assertion about the depth of God's attention to you, and the specific image chosen is deliberate to the point of being almost humorous. Hair is the most trivial, most disposable, most constantly changing thing about a human body. You shed dozens of strands a day without noticing. You have never given a single one of them a moment's thought. It is, by design, the least significant physical detail of your existence, and Jesus selects exactly that in order to make his point about the scale of God's knowledge of you. Not, God knows your name. Not, God knows your major life events. God knows the count, and the count changes daily, and he knows the new number. The context matters because this is not spoken in a moment of calm. Jesus is sending the disciples out and telling them in plain terms that they are heading into hostility, that they will be handed over, brought before authorities, hated, and that some of them will die. It is one of the most sobering passages in the Gospels, and in the middle of that briefing, he tells them their hair is counted. That juxtaposition is the whole teaching. He does not promise them safety, he promises them attention. The two are not the same, and the difference is enormous. Much of the anger and confusion people carry toward God comes from having been promised by someone that faith produces protection, and then discovering that it does not, always, and concluding that God must have looked away. Jesus never made that promise. What he insists on is that nothing happens to you outside of his notice. Not the difficulty, not the loss, not the detail so small that you never mentioned it to anyone. Bring this down into your ordinary life. There is a specific loneliness in carrying something no one knows about, a private grief, a low-level fear, a struggle you have never articulated because it would sound trivial if you said it out loud. You do not tell people about it because you have decided it is not big enough to bother anyone with, and so it sits there unwitnessed. The hairs of your head are numbered, which means the thing you decided was too small to mention has already been noticed. You are not being generally supervised by a God who tracks the important items and lets the rest pass. You are being attended to at a resolution finer than your own self-awareness. He knows things about your life that you have never bothered to know about yourself. That is not surveillance. That is love with an obsessive attention to detail. The way a parent knows the specific sound of their own child's cough in a house full of sleeping children. You are known that closely. You have never once been generic to him. Truth 6, ye are of more value than many sparrows. Matthew 10:31. Fear ye not, therefore, ye are of more value than many sparrows. This comes immediately after the counting of the hairs, and it completes the thought. Jesus has just said, are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. Then Luke's account preserves an even more startling version of the same saying, 5 sparrows for 2 farthings, which means the 5th one was thrown in free. Not worth pricing. given away because it was not worth the trouble of counting. The sparrow was the cheapest meat available in the ancient marketplace. It was what you bought when you could afford nothing else. A farthing, the Greek assarion, was a coin of almost negligible value, roughly a fraction of a day's wage for the poorest laborer. So Jesus deliberately selects the least valuable thing on sale in the entire market and says, "Not one of them hits the ground without your Father knowing." And then, "You are of more value than many of these." Here is why that particular comparison is so effective at rewiring self-perception. Human beings do not usually struggle to believe that God loves people. We struggle to believe He assigns value to us specifically because we know our own inventory. We know how little we have produced, how often we have failed, how unremarkable our contribution has been relative to what we intended. And when a person is honestly assessing their own worth by output, they will almost always come out low. Jesus is not arguing with your assessment of your output. He is arguing with the entire method. He grounds your value, not in what you generate, but in whose attention you hold. The sparrow contributes nothing. It has no achievements, no legacy, no usefulness beyond a few ounces of meat that barely justified the price. And its death is registered in heaven. There is a word in that phrase that repays attention, "shall not fall on the ground without your Father," not without God, without your Father. The relational term is doing deliberate work. The one who registers the fall of the worthless bird is the same one who stands in a father's relation to you. So the arithmetic is simple, and it is not flattering to your usual way of thinking. If the market's most worthless item is tracked with that care, then the question of your value has already been settled somewhere far above your own assessment of it, and settled by someone with considerably better information. You may have spent years quietly running the numbers on yourself and arriving at a low figure. Those numbers were never the right ones. Value in this kingdom is not earned into existence. It is conferred by the regard of the one looking at you. And notice how the sentence begins. "Fear ye not, therefore." The fear he is addressing is not primarily fear of danger. It is the fear of being expendable, the suspicion that when the pressure comes, you will turn out to be the one who was thrown in free. You are not the fifth sparrow, and even the fifth sparrow was watched all the way down. Truth 7. Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of. Matthew 6:8. Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. Jesus says this while correcting a specific habit, the practice of heaping up empty phrases in prayer, as though God were a distant official who must be worn down by volume and repetition before he will act. And the correction he offers is not a technique, it is a fact about who is listening. He knows before you ask. Think about what that eliminates. It eliminates the need to explain yourself. It eliminates the fear that you will phrase it wrongly and therefore fail to get through. It eliminates the exhausting sense that prayer is a kind of advocacy, where you must build a case, present evidence, and hope the argument lands. There is no case to build. The information is already in his possession in fuller detail than you could supply. But there is a deeper lie buried here, and it goes further than prayer technique. Many people carry a quiet conviction that their needs are an imposition, that to have needs at all is a kind of failure, that the mature, the strong, the spiritually developed person should have fewer of them, and so they minimize, apologize, and preface their requests with disclaimers, even to God. I know there are people worse off than me. I know this is small. I shouldn't even be asking. Notice that Jesus does not respond to that instinct by telling you to have fewer needs. He responds by telling you that your needs are already fully known and have not caused the slightest offense. The knowing came before the asking, which means your neediness has never been news to him, never been a disappointment, never been the thing that made him reconsider his relationship to you. And then the term he uses, your father, not a magistrate, not a benefactor who must be persuaded. A parent who knew the child was hungry before the child said anything, and who was already moving toward the kitchen. So if you have been living with the sense that you are too much need, too much difficulty, too many of the same requests brought back again and again, hear this plainly. You are not a burden being tolerated. You are a child whose needs were catalogued in advance by someone who was glad to know them. Prayer in that light stops being a performance of need and becomes something far simpler, the honest conversation of someone who is already fully known and still fully welcome. Truth 8. Our Father. Matthew 6:9. After this manner therefore pray ye, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. 2 words. Possibly the 2 most identity-altering words Jesus ever handed to ordinary people, and they are so familiar that their strangeness has been worn completely smooth. In the Judaism of that period, God was addressed with enormous reverence and considerable distance. The covenant name was so holy, it was not spoken aloud. Prayers used titles, Lord of the universe, King of kings, God of our fathers. There are a handful of places in the Hebrew scriptures where God is described in fatherly terms toward the nation as a whole, but the practice of an individual walking up and addressing God directly as Father in the intimate domestic term was not the norm. And Mark preserves the actual word Jesus used in Gethsemane, Abba, which belongs to family speech, the word a child uses in the house. He hands that word to a crowd of ordinary people and tells them to use it. When you pray, start here. Consider what that does to a self-portrait. Every human being has an operating assumption about their standing with God, and it is usually inherited rather than examined. Some people function as employees, standing dependent on performance, subject to review, always slightly behind. Some function as defendants, standing dependent on evidence, always aware that a fuller accounting would go badly. Some function as strangers, tolerated, unobjectionable, not particularly known. Jesus deletes all 3 categories with one word. You are family, not staff, not defendant, not guest. And the standing of a child is categorically different from every other kind of standing, because a child's place in the house does not fluctuate with usefulness. A child who breaks something is still a child. A child who has been difficult all week eats dinner at the same table. And notice, our, not my. He does not teach a private word for a private relationship. He teaches a word that assumes a table with other people at it. Your identity as a child of God arrives with siblings attached, which means the isolation you feel is a misreading of your actual situation. You have relatives you have not met yet. Whatever your father was like, attentive or absent, kind or frightening, present or a stranger, Jesus is offering a word that reaches past that history and attaches you to a fatherhood that does not fail. That is not a metaphor to comfort you. It is a legal reality about where you now belong. Truth 9. Consider the lilies. Matthew 6:28-30. And why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? The word consider is katamanthano, and it means to study something carefully, to learn from it by sustained observation. He is not saying glance at the flowers. He is telling anxious people to go outside and look at something small until it teaches them. And here is what the lilies teach. They toil not, neither do they spin. Both verbs are labor terms. The first, the work of men in the fields, the second, the work of women at the loom. He covers the whole economy of effort in 2 words and then points out that the most beautiful thing in the landscape did not participate in any of it. The lily's glory is not the product of the lily's striving. Then comes the comparison that must have made the crowd laugh. Even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Solomon was the byword for splendor, the wealthiest figure in the national memory, and Jesus says a roadside weed outdresses him. And then the argument lands, and it is an argument from lesser to greater. A standard rabbinic move. The grass is temporary. It grows, it dries, it gets gathered as fuel for the clay ovens, and by tomorrow it is ash. God dressed something with that shorter lifespan in that much beauty. What then is he likely to do for you? The phrase, "O ye of little faith," is not a rebuke delivered with contempt. It is a single compound word in Greek, oligopistos, and it functions almost as an affectionate name, you small faith ones. He is not surprised by the smallness of their faith. He's addressing it directly, without pretending it is not there. Bring this home. Anxiety about provision is rarely just about money. Underneath it is a question about whether you are the kind of person God bothers to take care of. Other people seem covered. You seem to be an exception, and the longer a difficult season lasts, the more evidence the mind gathers for that conclusion. Jesus answers by pointing at a flower. The lily did nothing to deserve its clothing. It did not earn, negotiate, or prove. It simply grew where it was planted and was dressed by the hand that made it. You are considerably more valuable than the grass, and you are dressed by the same hand. Part 2. The truths that break the power of shame. There is a difference between guilt and shame, and almost everything in this next section depends on it. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am something bad. Guilt is about an action and can be resolved by forgiveness. Shame is about identity and is not touched by forgiveness at all, because a person soaked in shame will simply add the forgiveness to the evidence of how much they needed forgiving. This is why so many people who genuinely believe they are forgiven still cannot look themselves in the eye. The doctrine landed in the head and never reached the floor of the self. The 9 truths in this section are aimed there. Watch how consistently Jesus deals with shame, not by minimizing what was done, but by refusing to let it define who is standing in front of him. Truth 10. Neither do I condemn thee. John 8:10-11. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go, and sin no more. Everything about this scene is engineered for maximum humiliation. She is taken in the act, which means men entered a private space and dragged her out. She is set in the midst, placed in the center of a circle of standing men in the temple courts, the most public religious space available. Her name is never recorded. She is referred to only by what she did. That is precisely what shame does to a person. It replaces the name with the act. The men holding her are not interested in her at all. She is an instrument in an argument, and then Jesus does something that has puzzled readers for 2,000 years. He bends down and writes on the ground, and the text does not tell us what. But notice the physical effect of it. Every eye that was fixed on a woman standing exposed in the middle of a circle has to move. He redirects the room's attention downward, away from her body, before he says a single word. Then, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone. And they leave, beginning at the eldest, the ones with the longest memories going first. And now the sentence that rewires everything, neither do I condemn thee. The Greek is katakrino, a courtroom word meaning to pass sentence. The only person present with the standing to condemn declines to do it. This is not indulgence, and it is not a claim that nothing happened. Go, and sin no more names the reality plainly. But the naming comes after the acquittal, not before it. He does not say, "Stop, and then I will not condemn you." He says, "I do not condemn you, now go and live." That order is the difference between religion and grace. And it is the difference between a life spent trying to earn back your standing and a life lived from a standing you were given. If there is something in your history that you believe has permanently altered what you are, not what you did, but what you are, this scene is for you. She walked into that circle defined by an act. She walked out defined by a word from Jesus. Nothing about the act changed. Everything about her name changed. Truth 11, thy sins be forgiven thee, Mark 2:5. When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. 4 men have carried a paralyzed friend across town, found the house impassably crowded, climbed onto the roof, dug through a layer of packed mud and branches, and lowered him on his mat into a room full of religious officials. They came for one thing. Everybody in that house knew what they came for. The man cannot walk. And Jesus addresses something nobody mentioned. Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. It is not the answer to the question that was asked. It is the answer to a question that was never spoken aloud, and the fact that Jesus goes there first tells you where he believes the deepest damage is located. We do not know this man's history, but we know something about the world he lived in, where illness was widely assumed to be the consequence of moral failure. A paralyzed man in that culture would have spent years absorbing the assumption, from neighbors, from religious teachers, possibly from his own family, that his body was a public verdict on his soul. Whatever guilt he carried, real or imagined, he had been lying with it for a very long time, and he had no way to put it down. Jesus lifts that first. Note the word he chooses to open with, teknon, translated son, but it is the warm domestic term, child. Before the healing, before the controversy, before the theological argument that is about to erupt, he gives the man a family word. The man came in as a case. He is addressed as a relative. There is something here that should reorganize the way you pray. You come to God with the presenting problem, the one you can name, the job, the diagnosis, the relationship, the fear that keeps you up. And often God begins somewhere else entirely, somewhere further back, at the thing underneath the thing. That can feel like being ignored. It is the opposite. It is being taken more seriously than you took yourself. The healing does come. He tells the man to take up his bed and walk, and he does in front of everyone. But observe the order once more, because the order is the teaching. Identity first, capability second. He is made a son before he is made mobile. Whatever changes in your circumstances, if it comes, will come after, and will rest on the settling of what you are. You may have been carrying something for so long that you have stopped noticing you are carrying it. It has become the floor rather than the weight. Jesus sees it, names it, and lifts it before you ever get around to mentioning it. Truth 12, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Matthew 9:13, but go ye and learn what that meaneth. I will have mercy and not sacrifice, for I am not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. He says this at a dinner table, and the location is the entire argument. He has just called Matthew a tax collector, which in that world meant a Jew who had contracted with the occupying empire to extract money from his own people, a man whose wealth was built on the humiliation of his neighbors. And then Jesus goes to his house and eats with his colleagues. Shared meals in that culture were not casual. To eat with someone was to declare public alignment with them. This is why the criticism is not, why does he speak to them, but why eateth your master with publicans and sinners? The offense is the table, not the conversation. And Jesus responds with a sentence that draws a line straight through every religious assumption in the room. I am not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Read that carefully, because there is a trap in it. He is not saying that some people are righteous and do not need him. He is saying that the ones who believe themselves righteous have placed themselves outside the category he came to address. It is not that they are excluded, it is that they have excluded themselves by their own self-assessment. The invitation is issued to sinners, and if you have decided you are not one, you have quietly declined an invitation you never knew was for you. Which means, and this is the part that rewires self-perception, your awareness of your own failure is not the thing keeping you at a distance from Jesus. It is the thing qualifying you for the table. Almost everyone gets this backwards. The instinct is to clean up before approaching, to resolve the pattern, break the habit, get a stretch of decent behavior behind you, and then come. But the sequence in this passage runs the other way. Matthew is still at his tax booth when he is called. The dinner happens immediately. The Reformation, whatever it looked like, followed the welcome. And notice what Jesus tells the critics to do. Go ye and learn. It is a rabbinic phrase, and it is slightly cutting. Go and study because you have not understood the text you quote. The verse he sends them to is Hosea, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. God has always preferred mercy to religious performance. It was written down centuries before Jesus sat at that table, and the people most confident in their standing had read straight past it. So, if your reason for keeping a distance is that you are not the sort of person who belongs, understand that you have just described precisely the sort of person he came for. Truth 13, they that are whole need not a physician. Matthew 9:12. But when Jesus heard that, he said unto them, they that be whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. It is the sentence immediately preceding the last one, spoken at the same table, and it deserves its own consideration because the image is doing something the previous sentence does not. He calls himself a physician. That is a striking self-description for someone who could have chosen judge, king, teacher, or prophet, all of which were available and all of which he uses elsewhere. But in the presence of people the community had written off, he reaches for the language of medicine, and medicine reframes the whole problem. A judge sorts people into guilty and innocent. A physician sorts them into sick and well, and the sick are not the ones he is against. They are the ones he is for. A doctor is not offended by symptoms. A doctor is looking for them. Symptoms are how the work begins. Now consider how differently you would relate to your own failures if you genuinely believe this. Most people relate to their sin the way a patient relates to a symptom they are hiding from the doctor, hoping it resolves on its own, embarrassed to describe it, delaying the appointment because naming it out loud makes it real. And the result is that the one thing most needing attention is the one thing kept out of the room. Jesus is saying, I am not the authority you are hiding from. I am the specialist you have been avoiding calling. There is also something quietly devastating in the phrase, they that be whole. He is not conceding that the critics are actually well. He is describing how they see themselves. People who believe themselves whole do not seek treatment, and their untreated condition is therefore worse, not better, than the condition of those in the room they are criticizing. The most dangerous place to stand is not sickness. It is the confident belief that you are fine. So here is the correction. Your awareness of what is wrong with you is not a mark against you. It is the first honest diagnostic in a process that leads somewhere. The people in real danger are the ones who feel no symptoms at all. You are not too sick for this physician. Sickness is his entire practice. Truth 14. Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents. John 9:1-3. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man, or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. The disciples walk past a man who has been blind since birth and see a theological puzzle. Their question assumes the entire framework of their age. Suffering is punishment, and therefore every affliction has an author. Their only uncertainty is whose fault it was. The man, meanwhile, is sitting right there, hearing himself discussed as a case study in divine retribution. He has almost certainly heard this conversation before, many times, in many voices, and Jesus dismantles the framework in one word: neither. Understand what that does. He is not offering a better answer to the question of blame. He is refusing the question. There is no guilty party to identify here. The suffering is real, and the cause is not moral. And the disciples' entire method of interpreting a human life, reading backwards from hardship to fault, is simply wrong. This matters enormously for the way you read your own history. Almost everyone who has suffered significantly has at some point run the audit. What did I do? What did I miss? What did I fail to pray, believe, confess, or repent of that would have prevented this? Sometimes there are real causes and real consequences, and honesty about them is healthy. But often there are not, and the audit becomes a machine for manufacturing guilt out of grief. Jesus says, neither. Then he redirects entirely, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. He shifts the tense from past to future, from what caused this to what will come of it. He does not say God caused the blindness in order to display something. He says this is where the display will happen. The question moves from origin to destination. And notice, made manifest in him, not through him, as though the man were merely a stage. In him. He is not a prop in someone else's demonstration. He is the sight of it. If you have been carrying a hardship you did not choose, and you have been quietly assuming it is a verdict on your character or your faith, hear the word neither. Your suffering is not a sentence. It is not evidence in a case against you, and the story is not finished at the point where the pain entered it. Truth 15. Her sins, which are many, are forgiven. Luke 7:47. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. A woman with a reputation walks uninvited into a Pharisee's dinner party, stands behind Jesus at the low table, and begins to weep. Her tears fall on his feet. Having nothing else, she lets down her hair, a scandalous act in public for a woman of that culture, and wipes them, and then breaks an alabaster flask of ointment over them. The host says nothing out loud. Luke records his thought. If this man were a prophet, he would have known what sort of woman this is. That phrase, what sort of woman, is the sound of shame being applied from the outside. Not what she did, what sort. A category, not an act. Jesus answers the unspoken thought with a story about two debtors, one owing 500 pence and one owing 50, both forgiven. Which will love more? The host gives the obvious answer and, in giving it, convicts himself. Then comes the sentence, and its logic has been misread for centuries. Her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. It sounds as though her love purchased the forgiveness, but the parable Jesus just told runs the other way. The forgiveness came first and produced the love. The Greek conjunction here is best understood as introducing evidence rather than cause. Her love is the proof that forgiveness has already occurred, not the price that secured it. You can see it in the closing line, to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. The order is always forgiveness first, love second. Now hold that against the way you have been treating your own past. If you have a history that produces a wince, you probably relate to it as pure liability, something to be minimized, hidden, and if possible forgotten. It is the part of your story you skip, and underneath that is the assumption that people with cleaner histories are further along, closer in, more useful to God. Jesus says the opposite, And he says it in the presence of a man with a spotless reputation who is, at that moment, the coldest person in the room. The one who knows the size of the debt is the one capable of the largest love. Simon has not been forgiven less. He has been aware of less. And his unawareness has made him incapable of what she is doing on the floor. Your history is not only liability. Handled honestly, it becomes capacity. A capacity for gratitude, for tenderness with other failures, for a love that people with tidier records find difficult to generate. Nothing about what you did was good, but nothing about it has to be wasted. And notice how the scene ends. He speaks directly to her, in a room where nobody has addressed her at all. Thy faith hath saved thee. Go in peace. The last word she hears in that house is peace. Truth 16. I will, be thou clean. Mark 1:40-42. And there came a leper to him, beseeching him and kneeling down to him and saying unto him, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him, and saith unto him, I will, be thou clean. To understand this, you have to understand what leprosy meant beyond the disease. Under the law of Moses, a person with this condition was ceremonially unclean, required to live outside the camp, and required to warn others of their approach. Whatever the physical suffering, the social sentence was total. No worship, no family table, no market, no touch. It was a life of enforced distance, and it was permanent. This man does something remarkable. He comes anyway, breaking the rules of his confinement, and he kneels. And his request contains a heartbreaking uncertainty. If thou wilt, thou canst. He does not doubt the power. He doubts the willingness. He is certain Jesus is able and entirely unsure that Jesus would want to. That is the exact shape of the doubt many people carry. Almost nobody who prays doubts God's capability. What they doubt is his inclination toward them specifically, that he can, but that for reasons rooted in their own history or their own unremarkableness, he might not want to. Watch what Jesus does before he speaks. He put forth his hand and touched him. Nobody had touched this man in years. His wife had not touched him. His children had not touched him. The touch is medically unnecessary. Jesus heals with a word at a distance elsewhere in the Gospels, so this is a choice. And it is a choice that carries a cost. Under the law, touching a leper made you unclean. Jesus deliberately crosses into the man's isolation before he removes it. Then, I will. It is 2 words in English and 1 in Greek, thelo, and it answers the man's precise uncertainty with total directness. Not I am able, I want to. Then the healing. This is the shape of how God deals with human beings. He enters the isolation before he ends it. He does not wait until you are presentable to come near. He comes near as the first act, and the cleansing follows the contact. If your doubt is not about God's power but about his willingness toward you, if you have quietly concluded that he helps others and merely tolerates you, this is the answer to that exact question, delivered before you had to explain yourself. I will. He was never reluctant about you. Truth 17. Zacchaeus, come down. Today I must abide at thy house. Luke 19:5. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him, and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. Zacchaeus is not merely a tax collector. Luke calls him the chief among the publicans, a supervisor, a man who profited from the work of other collectors, and he was rich. In the town of Jericho, he would have been the single most resented individual in the local economy, and he would have known it. And he climbs a tree, a wealthy adult male in a culture where dignity was everything, hiking up his robes and scrambling into a sycamore because he is short, and the crowd will not make space for him. That detail is not comedy, it is desperation. Something in him wanted to see Jesus badly enough to be willing to look ridiculous. He is hiding in foliage, expecting nothing more than a glimpse of a passing teacher. Jesus stops, looks up, and says his name. Consider what that would do to a man who had spent years being addressed by title, by insult, or not at all. Nobody in that town said his name with warmth. And the first word out of the mouth of the most talked-about man in Israel, in front of the entire crowd that despised him, is Zacchaeus. Then, "Today I must abide at thy house." The Greek carries the sense of necessity. It must happen. It is required. Jesus does not ask for hospitality. He announces that this is the appointment. And in that culture, entering a man's house and eating at his table was a public act of association. Jesus is not merely being kind to Zacchaeus in private. He's aligning himself with him in front of everyone, and Luke notes that the crowd murmurs precisely because of it. Nothing has changed yet in Zacchaeus' behavior. The restitution comes afterward. Half his goods to the poor, fourfold repayment to anyone he defrauded. That is his response, not his qualification. He is welcomed as he is, in the tree holding stolen money. The lie this truth breaks is the belief that you are known primarily by your worst reputation. Zacchaeus had one, and it was earned, and it was accurate. And it was not the name Jesus used. He knows your name, not the label the crowd uses. The name. Truth 18, Father, forgive them. Luke 23:34. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Of everything Jesus said, this is spoken at the moment of maximum human cruelty toward him, and the grammar of it deserves careful attention. The Greek verb here is in the imperfect tense. He kept saying it. This was not one sentence uttered once. It was a repeated prayer, offered over the sound of hammering, over the mockery, over the soldiers dividing his clothing beneath him. He said it, and then said it again. And the them is not narrow. The most immediate reference is the execution squad, men performing a routine task, but the sentence has always been read as reaching wider, out to everyone whose sin required that cross to exist. Now notice what is not present. There is no repentance in the scene. Nobody has asked for forgiveness. Nobody is sorry. The soldiers are gambling. The crowd is jeering. The religious leaders are congratulating themselves. And into that complete absence of contrition, Jesus is already interceding. That is the truth that reorganizes everything. The intercession preceded the repentance. It did not wait for it. It did not depend on it. There is a version of Christian belief in which God's posture toward you is fundamentally reactive, that he responds to your movement, that his willingness is downstream of your sincerity, that if you had been more genuinely sorry sooner, more would have been available to you. This scene refutes that at the deepest possible level. Before you were born, before you had done anything to be sorry for, and long before you were sorry for it, the prayer was already being prayed over you. And then the reason he gives, for they know not what they do. It is not an excuse. The act is still a crime, and he does not pretend otherwise. It is an insight into human blindness. People do terrible things without fully grasping what they are doing. Jesus sees the ignorance underneath the cruelty and factors it into his response, which means he also sees whatever ignorance was underneath your worst decision. He is not evaluating your history from the vantage point of your present self-knowledge. He knows exactly how much you understood at the time, and exactly how little. If you have a memory that surfaces uninvited and makes you want to close your eyes, understand that it was already covered by a prayer prayed in the imperfect tense over and over by someone who knew everything about it and interceded anyway. Part 3. The truths that give you a new name and a new family identity is not only a private matter. It is relational. It is largely constructed out of what we have been called and who we have belonged to. Change a person's name and their circle, and you have changed the person. This next section gathers the sayings in which Jesus does exactly that. He renames people. He redefines kinship. He assigns family from a cross and calls his followers by a title that would have been considered presumptuous coming from anyone else. If the last section removed what was falsely attached to you, this one attaches what is true. Truth 19, thou shalt be called Cephas. John 1:42. And when Jesus beheld him, he said, Thou art Simon the son of Jonah, thou shalt be called Cephas, which is by interpretation a stone. It is their first meeting. Andrew has brought his brother, and before Simon has said a word, Jesus looks at him and does two things. He states what he is, and he announces what he will be called. Thou art Simon, the son of Jonah. That is the present fact, his name and his lineage, the whole of his identity as the world had it. Thou shalt be called Cephas. That is the future, and it is spoken as a certainty. Consider the timing. This is before the confession at Caesarea Philippi, before the walking on water, before the sword in the garden, and, crucially, before the denial. Jesus names him Rock while knowing in advance every unstable thing this man is going to do. He knows about the sinking, he knows about the rebuke, he knows about the fire in the courtyard and the 3 denials and the sound of the rooster. The name is given anyway. That is what makes this truth so difficult to absorb, because it runs against everything we know about how names are earned. In ordinary life, reputation is retrospective. You get called reliable after a decade of reliability. You get called strong after you have not broken under pressure. Names follow performance. Jesus names forward, which means the name he uses for you is not a summary of your record. It is a declaration of the outcome. And there will be a long stretch, possibly the whole of your visible life, where the name and the evidence do not appear to match. Simon spent 3 years being called Rock while behaving like sand. Everyone watching, including Simon, could see the discrepancy. It did not alter the name. There is a practical consequence here for how you handle your own failures. If your name is a description of your current reliability, then every failure is a revision of your identity, and you will live in constant renegotiation with yourself. If your name was given in advance by someone who already saw the failures and gave it anyway, then a failure is a contradiction of who you are, painful, serious, worth addressing, and incapable of changing the underlying fact. You have probably been calling yourself by your worst tendency for years. Unstable, inconsistent, the one who always. Notice that Jesus does not deny what Simon presently is. He simply refuses to make it the name. Truth 20. I have called you friends. John 15:15. Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you. This is spoken in the upper room, hours before the arrest, and it is one of the most audacious redefinitions in Scripture. In the Hebrew tradition, being called a servant of God was not a demotion, it was the highest honor available. Moses is called the servant of the Lord. So is David. So is Joshua. It is the title given to the giants. The word doulos means bondservant, and to be God's doulos was the summit of human standing. And Jesus says, not that, something higher. The distinction he draws is about disclosure. The servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. A servant receives instructions without explanation. He is trusted with tasks, not with reasoning. A friend is told why, and Jesus grounds the friendship in exactly that. All things that I have heard of my Father, I have made known unto you. The evidence that they are friends is that he has explained himself to them. He has not merely commanded, he has confided. Sit with the implication. There is a way of relating to God that is entirely obedience-shaped. A life of doing what is required faithfully without any real sense of intimacy or understanding. Many sincere people live there for decades. It is not wrong exactly. It is simply less than what is on offer, and it produces a particular kind of weariness, the fatigue of serving someone you do not feel you know. Jesus is offering the other thing, not as a reward for advanced discipleship, but as the standing relationship. And notice the tense. I have called you friends, already done, not something they grow into. He says this to men who will abandon him before morning. He is not describing their loyalty. He is describing his own posture toward them, and it does not fluctuate with their performance in the next 12 hours. There is one more thing worth noticing. Friendship is chosen. Family you are born into, colleagues you are assigned, but a friend is someone who could have walked past and did not. Whatever else is true of your relationship with God, this word insists that at some level it involves preference. He did not merely accept you, he wanted your company. Truth. 21. Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you. John 15:16. Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you and ordained you, that ye should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain. This follows immediately, and it inverts something the disciples would have assumed without ever examining it. In the rabbinic world, the initiative belonged to the student. A young man sought out a teacher and asked to follow. The relationship began with the disciples' decision. Everyone in that room had grown up understanding it that way. Jesus tells them it did not happen that way at all. The initiative was never theirs, which means that whatever they thought was going on when Andrew went to find his brother, or when Nathanael came out from under the fig tree, or when Matthew stood up from his booth, underneath all of that human movement there was a prior movement they had not seen. They thought they were choosing, they were responding. This matters for a very specific insecurity. Many people who have been walking with God for years carry a quiet fear that their faith is essentially self-generated, that they talked themselves into this, that it rests on their own decision, and that therefore it could collapse if their conviction ever wavered. Faith on those terms is exhausting to maintain because you are the foundation of it. Jesus removes the foundation from you and places it under himself. You did not choose me. Whatever you experienced as your decision was the surface of something older and more secure. And then, I have chosen you and ordained you. That second word, ethemi, means to set or appoint or place, the language of installation. You were not merely selected, you were positioned, given a role, put somewhere on purpose. For what? That ye should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain. The purpose of the choosing is productive and enduring. He is not collecting people, he is planting them. And notice the word remain, meno, the same word translated abide, throughout this chapter. He is not interested in output that evaporates. What he intends to produce through your life is meant to outlast your life. So the correction is this: you have probably assumed that you are in this because at some point you decided to be, and that the whole arrangement, therefore, depends on the durability of your decision. It does not. You are here because you were chosen and placed. The choosing came first, and it will still be standing on the days your own conviction is thin. Truth. 22. Woman, behold thy son. John 19:26-27. When Jesus therefore saw his mother, and the disciple standing by whom he loved, he saith unto his mother, Woman, behold thy son. Then saith he to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour that disciple took her unto his own home. He is dying. His breathing is a mechanical struggle. Crucifixion killed by asphyxiation, and every word required pushing up on nails to fill the lungs. Words cost him something physical at this point. He has a small number left, and he spends some of them on household arrangements. Mary is at the foot of the cross. Under Jewish custom, the eldest son bore responsibility for the care of a widowed mother, and Jesus is fulfilling that duty in the last minutes available to him. But watch how he does it. He does not say, "John, please look after her." He does not make a request. He makes a declaration that creates a relationship. "Behold thy son, behold thy mother." 2 sentences, and a family exists that did not exist a moment before. And John, the text says, took her unto his own, into his home from that hour. There are several things here worth carrying away, but the central one is this. From the cross, in the act of dying, Jesus was assembling family. The very moment at which he was most isolated was the moment he was creating belonging for other people. That is not incidental to what the cross accomplishes. The New Testament will later describe the church as a household, and here is the household being formed in miniature at the foot of the cross. Out of 2 people who had no blood relation to each other and now had an obligation and a home. If you have felt the particular ache of not quite belonging anywhere, of being the one who is welcome but not woven in, present but not claimed, this scene speaks directly. The family Jesus creates is not primarily biological. It is spoken into being, and the entire posture of it is captured in that phrase, "took her unto his own." You have relatives you have not met. Some of them are in the room where you next gather. The family Jesus was making from the cross was not finished that afternoon. Truth 23. The same is my brother and sister and mother. Matthew 12:50. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother. His family has come to collect him. Mark's parallel account is blunter. They thought he was out of his mind. Word is sent into the crowded house that his mother and brothers are outside, and Jesus responds with a question that sounds almost harsh. Who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And then stretches out his hand toward his disciples. It is not a rejection of Mary, it is a redefinition of the category. Understand how much weight family carried in that world. Your family was your identity, your economic security, your legal standing, your reputation, and your future. You were known as the son of someone. There was no meaningful concept of the individual apart from the household. To be cut off from family was to be nothing. And Jesus says the deepest kinship runs along a different line entirely. Notice the specificity of his list, brother and sister and mother. He does not say a generic something. He names the individual relationships, and he includes sister in an era when women were rarely enumerated in such lists. Each of those roles carries its own kind of intimacy, and he distributes them across the room. Here is why this matters for how you see yourself. Many people are living with a family situation that cannot be repaired, a parent who is gone or present and unreachable, a sibling estrangement that has hardened past the point of the first move, a household in which faith is a source of friction rather than warmth. And there is a particular grief in that, because family is supposed to be the one belonging you do not have to earn, and when it fails, the failure feels like a comment on you. Jesus, whose own family stood outside a house thinking he had lost his mind, offers another category of kinship that is available regardless of what happened in the first one. It is not a consolation prize. Read the sentence again. Whosoever shall do the will of my Father, the same is my brother. He is not saying such people are like family. He is saying they are it. And note the qualification, which is beautifully low, doing the will of the Father, not achieving spiritual maturity, not arriving at correctness, turning, in whatever fumbling way, toward what God wants. That is the entrance requirement to a family that will outlast the one you were born into. Truth 24. I will not leave you comfortless. John 14:18. I will not leave you comfortless. I will come to you. The word translated comfortless is orphanos, orphans. He is telling men who are about to lose him that he will not leave them orphaned. It is an extraordinary word choice for a teacher speaking to grown men, some of them married, most of them with living parents. But it names precisely what they were about to feel. Everything they had reorganized their lives around was walking toward an execution, and the sensation of that is not merely grief. It is the specific panic of a child who looks up in a crowded place and cannot find the adult. That feeling is not confined to the upper room. It arrives in ordinary lives with some regularity, usually at the moment the structure you had been leaning on gives way. A job ends, a marriage ends, a parent dies, and you realize, at whatever age you are, that you are now the oldest generation. A church you trusted turns out to be something else. And underneath the practical disruption, there is that older, more primitive sensation. Nobody is coming. I will not leave you orphaned. I will come to you. Notice the second half, because it is doing something the first half does not. He does not merely promise the absence of abandonment. He promises presence, and he promises it in the present tense. Echomai, I am coming. Not I will send someone in my place. He has already spoken of the Comforter, the Spirit, in the verses just before. And now he collapses the distinction. When the Spirit comes, I come. That means the presence of God with you is not a substitute arrangement, a deputy dispatched while the principal is elsewhere. What the disciples had walking beside them on the road you have. There is one more thing in the promise worth catching. He says this to men who within hours will scatter and leave him. He is promising not to abandon people who are about to abandon him. The reliability being described is entirely one-directional. So, when the sensation comes, and it will, at some hour when the house is quiet and the structure you were leaning on has given way, the fact underneath the feeling is this. You are not an orphan. You have never once been left. Truth 25. Mary, John 20:16. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself, and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. One word. It may be the most powerful single word in the resurrection accounts. She has come to the tomb in the dark. She has found the stone moved, run to tell the others, come back, and now she is standing outside weeping. She turns and sees a man she assumes is the gardener. She has already spoken to him without recognizing him. Her grief is so total that it has closed her perception. She is looking directly at the answer to her sorrow and seeing landscaping staff. And Jesus does not begin with an explanation. He does not say, it is I, or do not weep, or look at my hands. He says her name, Mary. That is all it takes. Recognition arrives instantly, and she answers in Aramaic, Rabboni, reverting to the language of intimacy under emotional pressure, the way people do. Two things are happening here, and both of them are about identity. The first is that she is known in her grief, not addressed as a category, not offered a general comfort, but named. There is an enormous difference between being reassured and being recognized. Reassurance can come from anyone. Recognition can only come from someone who knows you specifically, and it does something reassurance cannot do. It locates you. It says, whatever this is, you have not disappeared inside it. The second is that grief distorts perception, and Jesus works with that rather than against it. He does not scold her for not recognizing him. He simply does the one thing that would cut through, the sound of her own name in a familiar voice. If you are in a season where God feels absent, consider the possibility that the absence is a perception problem rather than a presence problem. Mary's sense of abandonment was total and completely sincere and entirely mistaken. He was standing in front of her the whole time she was weeping about his absence. He knows your name, and he knows how to use it. And the moment of recognition, when it comes, will probably not arrive as an argument. It will arrive as something small and personal that could only have come from him. Truth 26. Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? John 21:15-17. So when they had dined, Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, Feed my lambs. Peter denied him 3 times beside a charcoal fire in a courtyard. Now Jesus has built a charcoal fire on a beach. John uses the same rare word anthrachia only in these 2 places in the entire New Testament, and asks him 3 times whether he loves him. The smell of that fire would have taken Peter straight back. This is deliberate. Jesus is not avoiding the failure. He is walking Peter directly into the memory of it, in the presence of the same sensory trigger, and doing something different there. Notice the address. Simon, son of Jonas. Not Peter, not the rock. He uses the birth name, the pre-calling name, the man as he was before anything was spoken over him. It is as if Jesus takes him back to the beginning and starts again from there. 3 questions for 3 denials. And after each answer, a commission. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. That is the part that rewires everything. What would you expect the restoration of a man who publicly failed to look like? Probation, presumably, a reduced role, a period of demonstrated reliability before responsibility is returned. That is how institutions handle failure, and it is how most of us handle our own. Jesus hands him the flock. Not a smaller flock, not a trial position. The care of the people Jesus loves most, given to the man with the worst recent record in the group, 3 days after the fact. And the reason is contained in the structure. Peter is not restored on the basis of a promise to do better. He made one of those already, and it failed spectacularly. Though all men shall be offended, yet will I never be offended. Jesus does not ask for another. He asks only about love. The qualification for the work is not reliability. It is affection. Peter is grieved, John notes, because he said it a 3rd time. The restoration was not comfortable. It required him to sit in the failure long enough to answer honestly rather than confidently. But at the end of it, he is not merely forgiven. He is deployed. Your failure has not disqualified you from usefulness. In this kingdom, restoration is not a demotion. It is frequently the beginning of the real work. Truth 27. I will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name. Revelation 2:17. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth saving he that receiveth it. This is the risen Christ speaking to a small, pressured congregation in Pergamos, and the image he chooses would have been immediately legible to them in a way it is not to us. White stones had several uses in the ancient world. In a court, jurors cast a white stone for acquittal and a black one for condemnation. At public feasts and games, a white stone functioned as a token of admission. You presented it, and you were let in. Victorious athletes sometimes received one inscribed with their name. All of these associations are probably active at once: acquittal, admission, and honor. But the detail that reorganizes everything is the last one. A new name written, which no man knoweth saving he that receiveth it. A private name, known only to the one who receives it and the one who gives it. Think about what that means against the way identity actually works for most of us. Nearly everything you believe about yourself has been assembled from external report. You know what your family said. You know how you were described in school, at work, by the people who loved you and by the people who left. Your self-concept is largely a compilation of other people's assessments, some accurate, many not. All of them made with partial information. And Jesus says there is a name for you that exists outside that entire system. Nobody else knows it. It cannot be workshopped, contested, or revised by committee. It was not derived from your performance, and it does not depend on anyone else's agreement, which means that the truest thing about you is currently something you have not yet been told. That is a strange and steadying thought. It implies that even your own self-knowledge is provisional, that you are not yet in possession of the final word about your own identity, and that the final word, when it comes, will come from the one who made you and will be better than anything you have managed to believe about yourself. Note also the promise of hidden manna. Manna was the wilderness bread given daily that could not be stored. Hidden manna suggests private sustenance, something given to you in secret that keeps you going when the public supply has run out. Sustenance and identity, both delivered privately, both from Him. You have been trying to construct a self out of other people's testimony. There is a stone with your name on it, and you have not read it yet. Part 4. The Truths that Rewire. What you believe about your worth. Worth is the deepest layer. Beneath your behavior sits your self-concept, and beneath your self-concept sits a single, silent verdict about whether you are worth anything at all. Most people never articulate that verdict. They simply live from it, and it drives an enormous amount of visible behavior. The overworking, the inability to rest, the compulsive helpfulness, the withdrawal, the difficulty accepting kindness without immediately repaying it. The 9 truths in this section come at that verdict directly, mostly through the Gospel of John, where Jesus speaks about what He came to give and what it cost Him to give it. Because in the end, the value of a thing is demonstrated by what someone was willing to pay for it. And that is the argument these sayings make. Truth 28. God so loved the world. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. It is the most quoted sentence in the Bible, and familiarity has almost entirely neutralized it. So let us slow down and look at what it actually claims. Start with the word so. In modern English it reads as an intensifier. God loved so very much. The Greek hutos more precisely means in this manner, or thus. God loved the world in this way. He gave. The sentence is not primarily measuring the temperature of God's affection. It is describing its method. Love here is defined by an act of giving something costly, then the world, cosmos. And in John's vocabulary, cosmos is almost never a neutral term. It is the human order in its hostility to God, the system that John will say knew Him not and received Him not. This is the object of the love, not the deserving, not the responsive. The world as it actually was, arranged against Him. Then, He gave His only begotten Son. The value of any object is established by what someone pays. That is how valuation works in every market that has ever existed. A thing is worth what was surrendered to obtain it. Apply that principle honestly to yourself. You have almost certainly been calculating your value from the inside, by inventory, talents, contributions, likability, achievement, the assessment of people whose opinions you weighted heavily. And that method will always produce a fluctuating and generally low result, because you have complete access to your own failures and only partial access to your own good. The cross introduces a completely different valuation. Whatever you're worth, it is now demonstrated by what was paid, and what was paid was the Son. This does not mean you are wonderful. It is important to be clear about that, because a shallow reading turns this verse into flattery. The world John describes is not wonderful. It is not being praised. What is being established is not merit, but value. And those are different things. A thing can be badly damaged and still be priceless, and the price paid for it says nothing about its condition and everything about the one who wanted it. You were wanted at that price. That is the fact, and it does not move when your self-assessment does. Truth 29, ye must be born again. John 3:7. Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus arrives at night. He is a Pharisee and a ruler of the Jews, a member of the Sanhedrin, one of the most religiously accomplished men in the country. He opens with a compliment and a careful theological observation, and Jesus does not engage with any of it. He goes straight to the foundation and says the whole structure has to come down. The phrase born again, genethe anothen, carries a productive ambiguity in Greek. Anothen can mean again, or it can mean from above. Nicodemus hears the first meaning and objects on practical grounds. A grown man cannot re-enter his mother. Jesus means both. What is required is not a repetition of the first birth, but a birth of a different order and from a different source. Here is why this belongs in a teaching about self-perception. Most self-improvement, including most religious self-improvement, operates on a renovation model. The building is basically sound. It needs work. You identify the failing areas, apply discipline, install better habits, and over time, the property improves. It is a hopeful model, and it produces real, if modest, results, and it will never touch the thing that is actually wrong. Jesus tells the single most renovated man in Jerusalem that renovation is not the category. What is needed is birth, a new origin. Something that begins rather than improves. That sounds at first like the harshest thing in this entire teaching. It says, your best efforts at self-betterment are insufficient at the level where it matters, but turn it over and see what it actually removes. If the answer were renovation, then the burden would be yours, and the outcome would depend on your consistency, and you would be permanently the weakest link in your own salvation. Because it is birth, the burden is not yours at all. Nobody arranged their own birth. Nobody contributed to it, prepared for it, or qualified for it. Birth is the one thing that happens entirely to you. Then Jesus adds the wind. It bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh. The Spirit is not manageable. You cannot generate this, which is precisely why you cannot fail to be adequate to it. You are not a fixer-upper, being slowly brought up to standard. You are, if you are in Christ, something that was started over. Truth 30. A well of water, springing up. John 4:13-14. Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water, springing up into everlasting life. He is sitting at a well in Samaria at noon, which is the wrong time of day to draw water. Women came in the cool of the morning together. A woman coming alone at the hottest hour is a woman avoiding the other women, and the conversation that follows explains why. 5 husbands, and the man she is with now is not one. Jesus asks her for a drink, placing himself in her debt, giving her something to give, and then offers her something in return. Focus on the mechanism he describes. He does not promise her a better supply. He promises a source. The water he gives becomes, in the person who receives it, a well, a spring, an internal origin of what she has spent her life going out to fetch. That distinction is the whole teaching, and it applies with uncomfortable precision to the way most people manage their sense of self. You have a thirst for reassurance, for significance, for the sense that you are all right, and you almost certainly have a well you go to for it. It might be achievement, it might be a particular relationship. It might be being needed or being right or being admired. The pattern is always the same. You draw, you feel steadied for a while, and then the level drops and you go back. Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again is not a threat. It is an accurate description of every external source of self-worth that has ever existed. The woman at the well was drawing from marriage over and over, and the repetition itself is the evidence. 6 attempts at the same well. What Jesus offers is not a 7th husband. It is an interior spring, a source of identity located inside her rather than out at the edge of town where the neighbors could watch her go. And note who he offers it to. Not a promising candidate, a woman with a history that had driven her out of ordinary community, having a theological argument with a stranger in the middle of the day. She is the first person in John's Gospel to whom Jesus openly declares his identity. If you have been walking out to the same well for years, understand that the exhaustion is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you have been drinking the wrong water. Truth 31. I will in no wise cast out. John 6:37. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. The English, in no wise, is a strong translation of a strong construction. The Greek uses a double negative, me, which in that language does not cancel itself out, but intensifies. It is the most emphatic form of denial available. Not ever, under no circumstances, by no means at all. And notice the shape of the promise. It is entirely unconditional on the front end. Him that cometh, not him that cometh with the right motives, not him that cometh having sorted out his doubts, or having stayed away from the thing he keeps returning to, or having come at last with sufficient sincerity. The only condition is coming. This matters because the fear it addresses is nearly universal among people who take faith seriously, and it does not usually announce itself openly. It sounds like a question about theology, and it is actually a question about welcome. Is there a point at which he has had enough of me? Is there a number of times I can come back with the same confession before the door closes? Is there a version of me, the one at 3 in the morning, the one nobody sees, that would change the answer? Me. Not ever. There is something else in the verse that steadies this further. Look at the first half. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me. Before the promise about individuals comes a statement about the whole. Your coming is not a random event that Jesus is graciously accommodating. It is the completion of a transaction between the Father and the Son. You were given, and therefore you came, and therefore you are kept. Which means the security of your position does not rest on the intensity of your feeling on any given day. It rests on an agreement made above your head. And consider who Jesus is speaking to when he says this. A crowd that has followed him across a lake because he fed them, and who will, by the end of this same chapter, walk away in large numbers because the teaching becomes hard. He makes the promise to a group that is about to demonstrate its unreliability. If you have been living with a low-grade fear that you are on some kind of probation with God, that the welcome is real but conditional and revocable, this sentence was constructed, grammatically, to make that fear impossible to sustain. Truth 32. I am the bread of life. John 6:35. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. This is the first of the 7 great I am declarations in John, and its setting is deliberately unglamorous. He has just fed 5,000 people with bread and fish. The crowd has crossed the lake to find him again, and Jesus tells them plainly why they came, not because they saw the miracles, but because they ate and were filled. They want more bread. He tells them he is the bread. Understand what bread meant. It was not one option among many at the table. In that economy, bread was the meal, the staple that stood between a household and hunger, the thing you worked for and prayed for daily. To call yourself bread is to place yourself in the category of necessity rather than enhancement. Now, most of us are functionally convinced that God belongs in the category of enhancement, something that improves a life which is basically running on other fuel. That belief is rarely stated, but it is easily detected. Notice what happens to your prayer life when things are going well, and what happens when they are not. If God is bread, the pattern would be steady. If God is a garnish, he appears when the main course fails. But there is a second thing here, and it is the one that touches self-perception most directly. He that cometh to me shall never hunger. That is not a promise that you will stop having appetites. It is a promise about where they terminate. There is a particular shame attached to hunger. Many people are quietly embarrassed by how much they need, how much reassurance, how much company, how much they are affected by a single unkind remark. They observe apparently self-sufficient people and conclude that their own neediness is a defect of character. Jesus, offering himself as bread, assumes hunger as the normal condition of everyone he is speaking to. He does not tell them to want less. He tells them what they were made to be filled by. Hunger is not the malfunction. It is the design feature that drives you toward the one thing that answers it. You were never meant to be self-sufficient. You were meant to be fed. Truth 33. If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. John 7:37-38. In the last day, that great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried, saying, If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believeth on me, as the Scripture hath said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. The timing is everything. This is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and on each morning of that feast a priest had carried a golden pitcher from the pool of Siloam up to the temple and poured water out at the base of the altar, while the crowds recited from Isaiah about drawing water from the wells of salvation. It was a ceremony remembering the water God gave in the wilderness and anticipating the water he had promised for the future. And on the final day, in the silence after the pouring, a man stands up in the temple courts and shouts that the thing the ceremony pointed to is standing in front of them. The verb John uses is krazo. He cried out, he shouted, "This is not teaching." This is a public announcement made at volume at the loudest moment of the religious year, and its content is an invitation with almost no barrier to entry. If any man thirst, not if any man is worthy, not if any man has completed the requirements of the feast. Thirst is the only qualification, and thirst is not an achievement, it is a lack. But then comes the second half, and it introduces something new. Out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. The one who drinks becomes a source. What comes in as a private rescue goes out as a public supply. That progression is worth sitting with because it answers a fear that people carry in the opposite direction from the ones we have addressed so far. Some people do not doubt that God would receive them. What they doubt is that anything useful could ever come out of them. They can accept being helped. They cannot imagine being a help. Jesus attaches the two things together in one sentence. Drinking and flowing are not separate stages of spiritual development, one for beginners and one for the advanced. The same water does both, and the word is rivers, plural, excessive, more than one channel, not a trickle carefully rationed. You are not a container with a fixed capacity that must be protected. If you are drinking, you are already, whether you can see it or not, a source of something for someone else. Truth 34. The truth shall make you free. John 8:31-32. Then said Jesus to those Jews which believed on him, If ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This sentence is carved on university buildings all over the world, usually stripped of everything around it. In context, it is far more specific and far more useful. First, notice the condition, if ye continue in my word. The verb is meno, abide, remain, stay. The freedom is not attached to hearing the truth or agreeing with it. It is attached to staying in it, which means the mechanism here is not information transfer, but residence. You do not become free by learning a fact. You become free by living somewhere long enough that it changes you. That distinction explains a great deal of frustrated Christian experience. People can hold entirely correct beliefs about grace and remain trapped in shame for decades. The information is present, the residence is not. Knowing you are forgiven and living inside forgiveness are two different addresses. Second, notice who he is speaking to. Those Jews which believed on him. This is not evangelism. He is talking to people who have already believed, and he is telling them there is a further step, and the response that follows is instructive. They are offended. We be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. It is a startling claim from a nation with slavery in Egypt and Babylon in its founding memory, and Roman soldiers in the streets outside as they speak. That is what makes the exchange so useful. The people most resistant to being made free were the ones most convinced they already were. Jesus answers by relocating the bondage. Whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. The chains he is talking about are not political. They are the compulsions that operate inside a person, regardless of external circumstances. Here is the application to how you see yourself. There is a difference between a person who does a thing and a person who is a servant to it. The first has a problem. The second has an owner. And most people who are in the second position have adjusted to it so completely that they have stopped naming it as bondage at all. It has become personality. This is just how I am. I have always been like this. The freedom Jesus offers begins by refusing that sentence. What you call your nature may simply be a long habit, and habits, unlike natures, can be broken by a truth you stay inside of. Truth. 35. Wilt thou be made whole? John 5:6. When Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? A man has been ill for 38 years. Lying beside the pool of Bethesda among a crowd of the sick who believed the water occasionally carried healing power. Jesus approaches and asks him a question that sounds, on first hearing, almost cruel. Do you want to be made well? Of course he does. He has been lying there for decades. What kind of question is that? It is a serious one, and the man's answer proves it. He does not say yes. He says, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. He answers a question he was not asked, explaining why healing has been impossible, defending the length of his condition. 38 years of being the man who cannot get to the water has become an identity, and identities are load-bearing. They explain your life to you. This is the most uncomfortable truth in this teaching, and it must be handled gently because it can be turned into a weapon against people who are genuinely suffering. So let us be precise. Jesus is not implying that the man's illness is his own fault. He is asking whether the man still wants the thing he has stopped expecting. There is a real phenomenon here that anyone who has carried something long-term will recognize. A wound held long enough begins to organize the personality around itself. It explains why you are the way you are. It provides a reason for what you have not attempted. It attracts a particular kind of sympathy. And healing, oddly, would cost something. It would remove the explanation and hand you back a responsibility you have not carried in years. Jesus asks first because the man's will matters. He does not heal him over his own head. He puts the question directly and waits. And then notice he heals him anyway, despite an answer that was not really a yes. Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. The man's ambivalence did not disqualify him, but the question was still asked, and it was asked because being made whole is something done with you and not merely to you. So let the question sit where it belongs. Not as an accusation, as an invitation to notice whether some part of you has quietly made peace with the thing you've been praying about. Truth. 36. Loose him and let him go. John 11:43, 44. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Loose him, and let him go. Two commands, and the second one is nearly always overlooked. The first, Lazarus, come forth, is the one that gets the attention, and rightly. A man 4 days dead walks out of a tomb. But look at the state he walks out in. Alive and completely bound, wrapped in linen strips, face covered, able to move, but not freely. The resurrection is total, and the appearance of him is still that of a corpse. And Jesus turns to the people standing there and gives them a job. Loose him and let him go. He does not remove the grave clothes himself. He could have. He raised the man from the dead. Unwrapping him would have been trivial. Instead, he assigns it to the community, to the sisters, the neighbors, the mourners who had come to grieve and now have to do something with their hands. There is an entire theology of ordinary Christian life in that arrangement. The thing only God can do, God does. The thing other people can do, other people are told to do. And the person in the middle stands there, alive in need of help with what remains. This speaks directly to a confusion that troubles a lot of sincere people. You have been made new, you believe that, you can articulate it, and yet you are still visibly wrapped in things. Old patterns, old reflexes, a temper you do not want, a habit of thought that starts running before you have consented to it, and the discrepancy between the doctrine and the daily evidence produces a suspicion that the resurrection did not really take. Lazarus was fully alive and fully bound at the same time. Those two facts were simultaneously true, and the second did not undermine the first. But notice what does remove the grave clothes: other people. Which means the residue of your old life is not something you were designed to unwrap alone, in private, out of embarrassment. It comes off in company. Every instinct in you will want to handle it privately. The instruction given to the crowd was to walk over and start pulling at the linen. You are not still dead. You are new and still wrapped, and the unwrapping is a group activity. Part 5. The truths that redefine strength, smallness, and greatness. Almost every unhappy self-image runs on a comparison, and almost every comparison runs on a scale that Jesus rejected outright. We measure by size, output, visibility, and capability. He measured by something else entirely, and repeatedly, in front of people who were keeping score. He praised the ones with the lowest numbers. The 9 truths in this section are about that reversal. They will not make you feel better about your ranking. They will make the ranking itself look like a category error. Truth 37. Except ye become as little children, Matthew 18:3, and said, Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. The disciples have asked, who is the greatest in the kingdom? It is not an abstract question. They have been arguing about it on the road. Jesus answers by calling a child over and standing him in the middle of the group. We have to be careful here, because our culture sentimentalizes children in a way the ancient world did not. Jesus is not praising innocence or wonder or imagination. In the 1st century, a child was a person of no legal standing, no economic value, no voice in any decision, and no ability to advance anyone's position. To be a child was to be, socially speaking, nobody. That is the illustration. He puts a nobody in the center of a conversation about greatness, and the word he uses is strepho, turn, be converted, reverse direction. He is not asking them to add humility to their existing ambition. He is telling them the direction of travel is wrong. They are climbing. The kingdom is downward. Then the specific quality, whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest. What a child has that the disciples had lost is the absence of a case to make. A child does not arrive with credentials. A child receives without embarrassment, asks without calculating, and depends without experiencing dependence as failure. That last one is the hardest for adults. Somewhere in the process of growing up, receiving becomes uncomfortable. You start keeping accounts, you accept help and immediately look for a way to repay it. You would rather be the one who gives, and you tell yourself this is generosity when frequently it is the fear of being in anyone's debt. The kingdom cannot be entered on those terms because everything in it is given. So the correction to your self-portrait is not that you should think less of yourself. It is that you should stop working the scale altogether. The disciples wanted a ranking. Jesus offered a child. Whatever position you have been quietly competing for in your family or your work or your church, it is a position in a system that does not exist where you are headed. Truth. 38. Their angels do always behold the face of my Father. Matthew 18:10. Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones. For I say unto you, that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. The word translated despise is kataphronio, to think down on, to regard as beneath consideration. And the warning is not primarily about cruelty. It is about dismissal. It is possible to despise someone without ever being unkind to them. You simply do not weigh them. Then Jesus gives a reason that is startling in its scale. These small, overlookable people have representation in heaven that stands permanently in the presence of God. In the courts of the ancient world, access indicated rank. To behold the face of the king meant to be admitted to his presence without appointment, an honor reserved for the highest officials. Jesus says that whatever heavenly attention corresponds to the least significant person you can think of, it holds that level of access, always, not periodically, not when there is a crisis. So the argument runs, be careful how you weigh people because heaven's estimate does not match yours. Now turn that around because the primary application in a teaching about self-perception is not how you treat others. It is that you are one of the little ones. Whatever internal ranking you have constructed, and you have one, everyone does, a rough sense of where you fall in significance relative to the people around you, you have almost certainly placed yourself somewhere in the middle or lower, and you have made peace with it. You are not one of the ones who matters much. You are fine with that. It is realistic. Jesus says the dismissal you have applied to yourself is a violation of how heaven sees the case. There is a standing appointment concerning you at the highest possible level of access, and it does not lapse. And notice the phrasing, my Father. He does not say the face of God in the abstract. He locates the whole arrangement inside a family. The one whose face is beheld on your behalf is a father, and the matter under permanent consideration in that room is you. The instruction was take heed, be careful. That applies to how you speak about your neighbor, and it applies equally to how you speak about yourself in the privacy of your own head. Truth 39. Whosoever will be great among you, let him be your servant. Mark 10:43-44. But so shall it not be among you. But whosoever will be great among you shall be your minister, and whosoever of you will be the chiefest shall be servant of all. James and John have just asked for the two best seats. They want to sit at his right and left in glory, and they have asked privately, hoping to secure the arrangement before the others find out. The others do find out and are furious, not because the request was inappropriate, but because they had wanted the same thing. Jesus does not rebuke the desire for greatness. That is worth noticing carefully, because it is not what we expect. He does not say, stop wanting to be significant. He says, shall not be among you, the Gentile pattern, where authority means leverage over people. And then he redefines the root. You want greatness? Here is the mechanism. Serve. The word for minister is diakonos, a table waiter. The word in the second clause is stronger, doulos, a bond servant, someone who does not own their own time. And then he applies it to himself. Even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. Here is what this does to your self-assessment. Most people evaluate their significance by measuring their influence. How many people know them, how much authority they hold, how much of the outcome depends on their input. And by that measure, the vast majority of human beings will conclude they are minor, because the vast majority of human beings do not hold much positional power. That conclusion produces a low, persistent sense of not counting for much. Jesus offers a scale on which anybody can be great immediately without permission. Serving requires no platform. It requires no title and nobody's approval. It can be done from the bottom of an organization, from a sickbed, from a household nobody outside ever visits, which means that if you have been faithfully doing unnoticed things for people who cannot repay you, you have not been failing to achieve significance. You have been accumulating it in the only currency that is convertible in the kingdom. Greatness on this scale is not a prize you compete for. It is an activity available to you this afternoon. Truth 40. She hath done what she could. Mark 14:8. She hath done what she could. She is come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying. A woman breaks an alabaster box of ointment over his head at a dinner in Bethany. The value is enormous. The text says 300 pence, roughly a year's wages for a laborer, and the room reacts badly. Some had indignation, Mark says. They call it waste, and they say the money should have gone to the poor, which is an argument that sounds unanswerable. Jesus defends her with 6 words that are among the kindest in Scripture. She hath done what she could. Look at what that sentence does not say. It does not say she did what was strategically optimal. It does not say she did the most effective thing available. It does not say she did enough. It says she did what she could, which is a statement about her capacity, not about the outcome. That is the measure he applies. There is a particular grief that comes from having limited capacity. You are aware of what the situation requires and aware that you cannot supply it. The person you love needs more than you have. The job needs a version of you that you cannot produce this year. You are tired in a way that does not resolve with sleep. And you do the small thing you are able to do, and it feels almost embarrassing next to the size of the need. Jesus says, she did what she could, and it will be spoken of wherever this gospel is preached for a memorial of her. He goes further than defense. He tells the room that her act has a meaning she probably did not fully intend. She has come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying. She was, whether she knew it or not, the only person in the Gospels who prepared him for death. The disciples were arguing about seating. She was anointing a body. Your small offering may be doing something you cannot see from inside it, and the standard being applied to you is not what was needed. It is what you had. Truth 41. This poor widow hath cast in more than they all. Mark 12:43, 4. Verily I say unto you that this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury, for all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. He is sitting opposite the treasury in the temple, watching people give. That detail alone is worth pausing on. Jesus sat and watched. It is a scene of deliberate observation. The treasury had 13 trumpet-shaped receptacles, and coins thrown in made noise. Large gifts were audible. The widow's 2 mites, lepta, the smallest coins in circulation, worth a fraction of a day's wage between them, would have made almost no sound at all. And Jesus says she gave more than everyone. He is not being sentimental. He means it as a statement of fact, and he explains the arithmetic. The others gave out of surplus, she gave out of lack. The measure is not the amount transferred. It is the proportion of what remained. By that measure, her 2 coins outweighed the audible gifts of wealthy men because they gave from what they would not miss, and she gave from what she needed. Take this into your own accounting, because most of us keep books on ourselves that use the wrong metric entirely. You compare your output to other people's output. You look at what someone else is producing, their energy, their apparent fruitfulness, the visible scale of their contribution, and you conclude that yours is negligible. Jesus is applying a different formula. What did it cost you relative to what you had? By that formula, an hour given by an exhausted person may weigh more than a day given by someone with reserves. A hard conversation attempted by someone terrified of conflict may weigh more than 100 easy ones. A prayer offered by someone who barely believes anything at the moment may weigh more than an eloquent one from a person in a settled season. Nobody in that temple heard her coins. He was sitting there specifically to watch. And she is the only giver from that day whose gift is still being described 2,000 years later. Truth 42. One thing is needful. Luke 10:41-42. And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. Martha is hosting. Her sister has sat down at Jesus' feet, and Martha, doing the actual work of feeding a house full of people, finally says something. Her complaint is entirely reasonable, and it is addressed, notice, to Jesus rather than to Mary. Dost thou not care? He answers by saying her name twice. Martha, Martha. In Hebrew usage, the doubled name is a form of tender address. Abraham, Abraham, Moses, Moses, Simon, Simon. It softens what follows. He is not annoyed with her. The word translated careful is merimnao, the same word used for anxiety elsewhere. Troubled is thorubazo, from the root for an uproar or a commotion. She is anxious and internally noisy, and he identifies the cause precisely about many things. Then, one thing is needful. Here is the point that matters most for how you see yourself. Jesus does not tell Martha that hospitality is unimportant or that serving is inferior to sitting. Both women are doing something legitimate. What he addresses is the internal state, the anxiety, the noise, the fragmentation across many things. And he offers a remedy that is not doing less, but wanting one thing. An enormous amount of adult exhaustion is not the result of too many tasks. It is the result of too many masters. You are trying to be adequate as a worker, a parent, a friend, a partner, a member of a community, and a person with some sort of interior life, and each of those has its own standard, and no version of you can satisfy all of them simultaneously. The fatigue is not from labor, it is from divided loyalty. The one thing is not a smaller to-do list. It is a single center around which everything else is arranged. And notice the last phrase, which shall not be taken away from her. Nearly everything you build can be taken. Roles end, bodies fail. The people whose approval organizes your effort will not always be there. What Mary chose is the only thing on the list that is not subject to removal. Martha was not wrong to be working. She was wrong to believe the working was holding everything together. Truth 43. Without me, ye can do nothing. John 15:5. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me, ye can do nothing. It sounds, on first hearing, like a diminishment. Read it again and notice what it actually establishes. The image is agricultural and precise. A branch is not a lesser plant attached to a greater one. A branch is part of the vine. Same organism, same sap, same life. It is not employed by the vine. It is continuous with it. The relationship being described is not service, but connection. And a branch does not manufacture fruit. It cannot, and it does not try. Fruit appears on branches as a byproduct of remaining attached. No branch has ever strained. Now consider what that does to the question of your adequacy. Almost everyone who takes their faith seriously has, at some point, felt the pressure of being expected to produce, to be more loving than they naturally are, more patient, more disciplined, more useful. And when the production falls short, the conclusion is straightforward: I am failing. Jesus reframes the entire operation. You are not the producer, you are the site of production. Your job is not fruit, your job is attachment. Abide, which means the correct response to a fruitless season, is not more effort. It is closer proximity. Then the last clause, which is stated with no softening: without me, ye can do nothing. The Greek is emphatic. Apart from me, nothing, not a small amount. That is a hard sentence for capable people, and capable people usually discover its truth late and painfully, after some season in which their competence stopped being sufficient. But look at what it removes. If nothing can be done apart from Him, then the burden of self-generated spiritual performance is not merely difficult, it is impossible, and can therefore be set down permanently rather than carried with increasing guilt. Dependence is not the humiliating condition you fall into when you fail. It is the design. A branch that resents being attached has misunderstood what it is. Truth 44. Greater works than these shall he do. John 14:12. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also. And greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father. This is one of the boldest sentences in the Gospels, and it is spoken in the upper room, hours before the arrest, to 11 men who are about to fail comprehensively. Whatever greater means here, and it is not primarily about spectacle, since the works he is about to leave behind include raising the dead. The reason he gives is the key: because I go unto my Father. His departure is what makes the expansion possible. Confined to one body in one region, his work was geographically bounded. Distributed across his followers by the Spirit, it becomes global. Greater in extent, in reach, in the number of lives touched. But notice the door he attaches it to: he that believeth on me. That is the entire qualification. Not he that is gifted, not he that has been trained. Belief. Now bring this to the way you assess your own potential usefulness. Most people carry a fairly settled estimate of their own ceiling. You know what you are good at and what you are not. You know how you compare to the people you consider capable. And that estimate quietly governs what you are willing to attempt. You do not apply, do not offer, do not begin, because you have already run the calculation. The calculation is based on your resources. Jesus is describing something that runs on his. This is not an encouragement to attempt things beyond your competence out of sheer optimism. It is something more sober and more freeing. The works being described are his works, done through people who believe, and therefore the limiting factor was never your capability. You have almost certainly underestimated what your ordinary life is going to end up having accomplished. The 11 men who heard this sentence scattered within hours, and within a generation, the thing they carried had crossed an empire. Truth 45. I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not. Luke 22:31-32. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not. And when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. Sifting wheat means shaking it violently in a sieve until the chaff separates. It is not a gentle image, and Jesus tells Peter plainly that it is coming. Then, I have prayed for thee. The tense matters, not I will pray. The praying has already happened before the sifting, before the denial, before Peter has any idea what he is capable of. And notice precisely what Jesus prayed for. Not that Peter would be spared the sifting, not that he would pass the test. That thy faith fail not, the Greek eklepo, to run out entirely, to give out completely. Jesus did not pray that Peter would stand, he prayed that Peter would not be finished when he fell. That distinction is the whole of this truth. The prayer anticipated the failure and asked for something on the far side of it. Then the most extraordinary phrase, when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. Not if, when. Jesus is already speaking about Peter's post-failure ministry, while Peter is still insisting he would go to prison and to death. The future usefulness is assumed, planned for, and assigned before the collapse has even happened. Bring that home. There is a memory in most lives of a moment where you did not hold, where you knew what was right and did not do it, or knew what you believed and could not say it, or promised something and then discovered the promise was larger than you. And the private conclusion drawn from such a moment is usually a permanent one. I now know what I actually am. Jesus knew that about Peter before Peter did, prayed accordingly, and made plans for the man on the other side. And notice the double name again. Simon, Simon, the tender address. He is not warning him coldly. He is telling a man he loves gently that a hard thing is coming, and that arrangements have already been made for afterward. Whatever sifting you have been through, someone was praying on the front end of it, and the prayer was not that you would be spared. It was that you would still be here afterward. You are still here. Part 6. The truths that anchor you in forever. Everything so far has been about the present. Who you are now, what you are worth now, how you are seen now. This last section changes the time frame, because a self-image built entirely within the boundaries of one lifetime will always be fragile. Your body will decline. Your capabilities will narrow. The roles that currently define you will end, one way or another. Any identity that depends on those things has a countdown attached. These final 7 truths reach past that. They are the sayings in which Jesus speaks about what does not end, and they are the anchor that holds every other truth in place. Truth 46. Rejoice, because your names are written in heaven. Luke 10:20. Notwithstanding in this rejoice not that the spirits are subject unto you, but rather rejoice, because your names are written in heaven. The 70 have come back from a mission trip elated. Even the demons are subject unto us through thy name. It is a legitimate report of a genuine success, and Jesus does not deny any of it. He redirects the joy. Do not rejoice in that. Rejoice in this instead. Your names are written in heaven. Understand what he is protecting them from. Joy anchored in effectiveness is joy attached to a variable. The 70 had a good week. There would be weeks where nothing happened, where the ministry was fruitless, where the power seemed absent, and if their gladness was fastened to results, it would collapse on schedule. He is not correcting a sin, he is relocating a foundation, and this applies with almost uncomfortable directness to most of us. Ask yourself honestly, what makes a day feel like a good day? For most people, the answer is achievement-shaped. Something got done, something worked, someone responded well. And on the days when none of that happens, the sense of being all right in the world quietly drains away. Jesus offers something that does not vary. Your name is written somewhere in a register you did not compile and cannot be removed from by a bad quarter. The image of a written name would have been familiar. Cities kept citizen rolls, and to be enrolled was to have standing that no individual failure could revoke. It is a permanent, external, documented fact about you. So on the days when nothing works, when you were not effective, when the report you would give of your own week is thin, the thing Jesus told you to rejoice in has not moved. It was not affected by the week. It was written down before the week began. Truth 47. Fear not, little flock. Luke 12:32. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Every word in this sentence is doing something. Fear not. The standard opening of divine address throughout Scripture, because the standard human response to God's nearness is alarm. Little flock, mikron poimnion, and it is almost affectionate in its diminutiveness. He does not tell them they are bigger than they feel. He agrees that they are small. He simply does not treat their smallness as a problem. Your Father's good pleasure, eudokeo, meaning to take delight in, to be well pleased by. It is the same verb used at his baptism, when the voice from heaven declared pleasure in the Son. The giving is not reluctant compliance with a request. It is something God enjoys. To give you the kingdom, not to lend it or to award it on completion of the requirements or to grant access on probation, to give. And notice the scale of the gift against the scale of the recipient. A little flock and an entire kingdom. The disproportion is the point. Here is what this addresses. There is a way of relating to God in which you feel permanently on the edge of asking too much. You bring the small requests and hold back the large ones. You would never say it out loud, but the operating assumption is that his generosity has a limit, and you should be careful not to test it. Jesus says, the largest thing available is what he is glad to hand over, and that the smallness of the recipient is not an obstacle, but part of what makes the giving a pleasure to him. The context, in Luke, is a long passage about anxiety over provision, food, clothing, tomorrow. And into that anxiety, Jesus does not simply promise that the necessities will be covered. He announces the kingdom. It is a kind of answer that overshoots the question so far that it changes the question. You have been asking whether there will be enough. He is telling you what is in the will. Truth 48. In my Father's house are many mansions. John 14:1-3. Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. The word rendered mansions is monai, from the same root as abide. It means dwelling places, resting places, rooms. The house is a family home, and what he is describing is not a property portfolio, but a residence with enough room in it. Then the clause that always startles on close reading. If it were not so, I would have told you. He is anticipating the doubt. He knows they will wonder whether he was being kind rather than accurate, and he closes that door in advance. I would not have said it if it were not true. There is a particular tenderness in that. It is the sentence of someone who knows exactly which reassurance you will later suspect was too good. Then, I go to prepare a place for you. The preparation is personal and specific, not a place. A place for you. And notice the reason he gives for saying any of this at all. Let not your heart be troubled. He is not delivering information about the afterlife for its own sake. He is applying it as treatment for present distress, hours before his arrest, to men who are frightened. That is how eternity is meant to function in a life. Not as a topic reserved for funerals, but as ballast, the thing that steadies you now, this week, in the room you are actually in. Here is what it does to self-perception. Homelessness, in the deep sense, is one of the most common features of modern interior life. Not literal homelessness, but the sense of not quite having a place, of being provisional wherever you are, tolerated rather than settled, never fully arrived. There is a room. It is being prepared. Somebody knows the dimensions of you well enough to build for them. Truth 49. I am the resurrection and the life. John 11:25-26. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this?" Martha has just said something theologically correct and emotionally useless. Her brother is dead, and she says, "I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day." It is the standard Jewish belief of the period, and she believes it, and it is not helping her at all. Jesus takes the doctrine and turns it into a person. "I am the resurrection." That move is the whole teaching. The thing she was locating in the distant future, as an event on a calendar she could not see, he relocates into the present, standing in front of her, in conversation. Notice the sequence. He says this before he raises Lazarus. The claim comes first, and the demonstration follows. He is asking her to believe him at the point where she has only his word and a sealed tomb. And then he asks, "Believest thou this?" He puts the question to her personally, by name, in her grief, requiring a response. Here is what it does to how you see yourself. If resurrection is a doctrine, then your death is an ending followed, eventually, by a reversal. If resurrection is a person you are joined to, then the character of your life has already changed. You are not someone waiting to be rescued from mortality at a future date. You are someone in whom a life of a different order has already started. And that reframes everything about how you evaluate a life. Your body will decline, your capacities will narrow, every trajectory you can measure over a long enough period points downward. But whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die, makes a claim about the underlying thing that the visible trajectory does not touch. Martha's answer, when it comes, is one of the great confessions in the Gospels. She does not say she understands. She says she believes he is who he says he is. That was enough for the tomb to open. Truth 50. It is finished. John 19:30. When Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. One word in Greek, tetelestai. It was a commercial term. Archaeologists have recovered papyrus receipts from the ancient world with this word written across them, meaning the debt has been settled in full and nothing further is owed. It was also used of a task completed and of a purpose fully accomplished, and the tense is the perfect, an action completed in the past, whose effects continue permanently into the present. Not merely finished, but finished and remaining finished. This is not the cry of a man giving out. John notes that Jesus said it after receiving the drink deliberately, and then bowed his head. The word suggests laying it down, as one does on a pillow, an act of volition rather than collapse. Now, why does a word about a paid debt belong in a teaching about how you see yourself? Because the single most exhausting way to live is on an unpayable account. And that is precisely how a great many sincere people experience their spiritual life, as an ongoing attempt to become square with God, in which every failure adds to a balance and every good stretch reduces it slightly, and the total never reaches zero. Such a life produces a specific and recognizable fatigue. You cannot rest, because resting means the balance grows. Tetelestai closes the account, not partially, not pending review of your future conduct, not on the condition of a sufficient improvement rate. The receipt is stamped and the transaction is complete, and it was completed by someone else before you were born without your participation. Which means every hour you have spent trying to earn a standing you already possess was spent paying a debt that no longer existed. The curtain in the temple tore that afternoon from top to bottom. From above, the gospel writers note carefully, not from below. The barrier was removed from the inside. You were not admitted after negotiations. The door was opened from the other side while you were still deciding whether you were allowed to knock. Truth 51. Today shalt thou be with me in paradise. Luke 23:43. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. The man he is speaking to is a criminal being executed alongside him. Luke uses a word for a violent robber or insurrectionist. He has, by his own admission, received the due reward of our deeds. He is guilty, he knows it, and he says so out loud. He has no time left to reform. That is what makes this scene the most complete demolition of earned salvation in Scripture. There will be no restitution, no changed life, no years of faithful service, no baptism, no membership. He has hours, and he cannot move. All he does is ask, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And the answer contains three things, each remarkable. Today, not eventually, not after a period of purification. The timeline is immediate. Shalt thou be with me? The content of the promise is not primarily a location, it is company. Paradise is defined by the pronoun in paradise. The word paradisos is Persian in origin, meaning a walled garden, the private enclosed garden of a king, which nobody entered without invitation. Now consider what this establishes about the basis of your standing. If a man with hours to live, no record of good works, and a public conviction can be told today, then the entrance requirement cannot possibly be accumulated merit. Whatever gets a person in, he had it, and he had nothing else. There is enormous comfort in that for anyone who has arrived late, wasted years, or is watching the time available to make something of their life grow short. And there is a quieter comfort in it for people who have not wasted anything, because it clarifies that their long faithfulness was never the currency either. Two men were executed beside Jesus. Both were guilty. One asked. The distance between them was a single sentence spoken from a cross. Truth 52. Lo, I am with you alway. Matthew 28:20. Teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you alway, even unto the end of the world. Amen. These are the last recorded words of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, and they are the right place to end 52 truths about who you are, because they are the foundation underneath every other one. The word alway is not simply always. The Greek is passas tas hemeras, all the days. Every one of them individually counted out. That phrasing changes the promise from an abstraction into an inventory, not I am with you in general. All the days you feel it and the days you do not. The days you behave in a manner consistent with everything in this teaching, and the days you contradict all 52 of these truths before lunch. Every day in the sequence, one by one. And notice the verse just before, in Matthew's account, some doubted. He gives the Great Commission to a group that includes people who, standing in front of the risen Christ, were not entirely sure. He does not wait for the doubt to resolve. He commissions them as they are, and then promises to be with them, even unto the end of the world, the end of the age, the completion of everything. There is no expiry. Here is where this lands. Everything in these 52 truths depends on presence. Being valued is meaningless if the one who values you is elsewhere. Being named, chosen, forgiven, and given a place, all reduced to sentiment if the person who said those things has since moved on to other business. Jesus closes by removing that possibility. The one who called you at the shoreline, who declined to condemn you, who named you before you were reliable, who prayed for you before you failed, and who finished the account, is here. Not in memory, not in principle. Here in the room on this day, which is one of all the days, you are not being observed from a distance by someone who once said good things about you. You are accompanied. Closing reflection. 52 weeks, and the person you will be at the end of them. We began with a number, and it is worth returning to it now that you have heard all of them. 52. One for every week between this day and this day next year. And the reason that number matters is that nothing said in the last hours will rewire anything if it stays where it currently is. Right now, these 52 truths are information. You have heard them, some of them have landed, one or two have probably found the exact place they were aimed at. But information is not the same as identity, and the distance between the two is measured in time and repetition. Here is what actually changes a person's self-perception, not intensity, duration. The lies you carry did not arrive in a single afternoon. They were installed slowly by repetition over years until they stopped sounding like claims and started sounding like facts. They will not come out faster than they went in. They come out the same way, by something else being said over you repeatedly, until it is the thing that sounds like a fact. So take them one at a time, one truth for 1 week. Let the first one work on you for 7 days. You were called before you were qualified. Then the next. Do not attempt to absorb 52 things at once, because you will absorb none of them. And notice, as you go, what these 52 have in common. Every one of them was spoken to a specific person or a specific crowd in a specific place. A shoreline, a hillside, a rooftop, a well at noon, a dinner table, a tree, a beach, a cross. None of them were general statements about humanity in the abstract. Jesus almost never spoke about people. He spoke to them, which is the last thing worth saying about your identity. The self you have constructed over the years is largely a summary, an average of what has been said to you and about you, compiled into a general impression. It is broad, it is blurred, and it is mostly other people's material. What Jesus offers is not a better summary. It is a particular word spoken to you specifically in the actual situation you are in. Mary, Zacchaeus, Simon, son of Jonas, woman, where are those thine accusers? Wilt thou be made whole? He does not deal in categories, he deals in names. So the question at the end of 52 truths is not whether you agree with them. It is which one was for you. Something in these hours found its mark. There was a sentence that made you go still, or made you look away from the screen, or made something rise in your chest that you did not expect. That was not accidental, and it was not a general observation about human beings. It was addressed. Take that one. Carry it into the week. Let it be the thing that speaks over you when the older voice starts up again. And it will start up again, probably before this day is out, because old voices are persistent and they have had a long tenure. You have heard over these hours from the one who made you about what you are. That testimony outranks every other one you have received, including your own. Before you go, I want to ask you for one thing, and it is not for me. Share this video with one person, not a list, one. And I suspect you already know who, because somewhere in the last few hours, a face came to mind, probably more than once, probably during one specific truth. Someone who has been calling themselves by their worst tendency for years. Someone who is quietly certain they are too much or not enough or too far gone or simply not the kind of person God bothers with. Someone who would never say any of that out loud and who is carrying it anyway. Send it to them. You do not need to write an explanation or attach a message that makes it awkward. You do not need to be able to predict what it will do. Just send it. And let the words of Jesus say to them what you have been trying to find a way to say for a long time. That is a real act of love toward one soul, and it costs you nothing but the 30 seconds it takes to press send. And if this teaching has been worth your hours, subscribe as well. It is free, it is a single tap, and it keeps your seat here for what comes next. But the share is the thing. The share is the heart of it. One last invitation before the blessing. In the comments, tell me which line, which of the 52 or which single sentence inside one of them you most needed to hear today. Name it. Not the one you thought was most interesting, the one that found you. There is something clarifying about writing it down, and there is something quietly powerful about scrolling through and seeing which words are landing in which lives all over the world at the same hour. Now, a blessing over you, and then I will let you go. May the God who named you before you were reliable keep saying that name over you until you can hear it without flinching. May every lie you have carried so long that it stopped sounding like a lie be loosened this week, gently in company, the way the grave clothes came off a man who was already alive. May you stop calling yourself by your worst week. May the account that was closed 2,000 years ago stay closed in your own mind, so that you can finally rest inside a standing you did not earn and cannot lose. And may you know, not merely as a doctrine you would affirm if asked, but as the settled ground under an ordinary Tuesday, that you were called at the shoreline, counted down to the hairs on your head, chosen before you chose, prayed for before you failed, and accompanied on every one of all the days. You are known. You are wanted. You are not too much, and you have never been too little. Go in peace. He is with you.